Great morning, humans. Great morning, world. This is your boy, Dr. JC Doornick, and welcome to another edition of the Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. This is a place where confusion dies and progress thrives. So, very excited about this today. Unaware just days ago that June has been deemed Men's Mental Health Month. And this one is dedicated to all of the men out there, as well as myself. And we're going to have some fun and we're going to unpack some things and arm all of you, as well as myself, in doing so with awareness. And I think that's what the whole idea of something like Men's Mental Health Month in June is about. And it's about awareness. And that's what this podcast is all about. This podcast is just about the idea of arming people with the awareness of multiple perspectives on things. I think where we get caught up very often is allowing our conditioned mind, our programmed conditioned mind that, started off in the formative years and, was conditioned by our mother, father, teacher, preacher, and then went on to be conditioned by everything that we consume in society. And we even have the paying forward of everything that we learned from evolution. And you guys are in the live version of this podcast today. We are actually recording the podcast version of it today. So that's why you see me looking like I do. But in any case, that's what we're going to do. We're going to arm ourselves with the awareness of something. And once you're aware of something, it doesn't mean that everything in your life changes. It changes in the sense that now you know, but we still have this miraculous ability, men as well, right? Especially men, to create a bias and overlook something that we know. And we still have this ability to choose the way that we want to see things and the way that we want to respond to things. So the whole idea behind the work that I do in the Make Sense Academy and with the interface response system and all of our communication technologies is to recognize that there's this conditioned mind that's going on that, has your ego working for it. And it's always pretty determined on seeing things a certain way. And that would be the way that you've typically seen them, your version of what we call normal. But we know that growth and expansion happens where? Not in that space, in the abnormal. So what we teach people to do is just allow yourself, give yourself permission to acknowledge that your programmed and conditioned mind, which is predetermining the way that you see and feel and think, has a lot of potential faults, right? Gets us into trouble. So if you're not satisfied with your life, if you're discontent, or even if you just like the idea of being open and curious and exploring more, then you might want to just drop a whenever you're thinking and feeling, or a whenever somebody says something that evokes some sort of knee-jerk reaction. So today's topic we call Manning Up, the zero-sum game of manhood. This is a fascinating thing. And unfortunately, during this month, we're reminded of losing a lot of very, very valuable people. And as a man, as a father, twice over, right? Because I raised two young boys and then have the opportunity of now going back in the game with a daughter. And that's a whole new ball game, fathers out there. But this really hits home because not only am I fascinated with this for obvious reasons, but I'm also in it as well. And this idea of becoming conscious and aware of some things that are running around in the background, which doesn't have to just be about this topic, but as a man, we are very much wired and conditioned to be a certain way, and society is prompting us to go further down that rabbit hole. So for us to stop that 120,000 ton oil tanker that's steaming ahead in one direction, it's not easy. So all I'm inviting everybody to do with my material, whether you're following me here in the Make Sense podcast, or watching this video live, or a recorded YouTube, or maybe even reading about this stuff in my free Substack, all of that stuff is easily acquired by just looking me up. It's not about learning things and just knowing them. It's about putting them into play. So I hope that this will arm you with that awareness. So this is going to be a self-reflection that's kind of going to blend my own self-reflection, but also the Jungian aspect and the shadow work of this amazing book written by James Hollis, and that is called Under Saturn's, oh no, I'm sorry, yes, Under Saturn's Sunrise, or Under Saturn's Shadow. How funny is that? So let me read that again for the podcast. So this is a self-reflection, and it'll be blended with Jungian insight from Under Saturn's Shadow by James Hollis, as well as the dragon's self-reflection. And that's what always makes these things interesting. So for anybody that is interested in learning more about men's health, but also learning about shadow work, James Hollis is a great read. And as you know, last week on the other last live that we did the middle passage by him. So let's have some fun. And I invite you, if you're watching this anywhere on maybe Facebook, Instagram, or on YouTube, to interact. And you might even want to say hi now, just to let me know that you're interactable. So in recognition of Men's Mental Health Month, I offer this not as a diagnosis, but as a mirror, a reflection of one man's honest reckoning and what it really means to be a man in a world that rewards our silence and buries our truth. Ooh, isn't that true? So every June, as I stated before, we remember some of the tragic losses of great men. Some prominent ones that most people recognize: Robin Williams, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Anthony Bourdain. And these were men who made us laugh, think, feel, and then left us all too soon, as they all do. These weren't weak men by any means. They were men crushed by a quiet torment of expectations that they could no longer uphold, and the silence that made it impossible to ask for help. So let me say something that might cost me myself. I'm going to get vulnerable right now. I'm going to say something that might cost me myself the stamp of being considered a real man in the eyes of you. Hi. My name is Dr. J.C. Doornick. Other people call me the Dragon, and I am scared about a lot of things. There, I said it. I know some people will hear that or read things like that and think that I have all of a sudden betrayed the code. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the code of being a real man. And you don't have to be a man to listen to this, because there's a chance that you have a relationship with a man, regardless of your preferences. It's important to understand what's going on the other side. You know, we read books like Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. That's what this stuff is about if you are not currently a man. So some of you might think that I've betrayed the code, but what I'm doing is I'm creating space for honesty. And that is what we may need in order to prevent some more loss. So you might think that I've kind of outed the brotherhood by saying I'm scared. And guess what? Whether they admit it or not, other guys are too. But I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of losing other friends and men. And I've lost a lot. I've lost 5 very close friends. And I've lost them to silence, to pride, to pressure. Okay. And to shame as well. And if sharing the truths help even just one man feel the courage to remove his mask in a proactive way, then it's worth it. Because here's the truth. Let's talk about the truth today. Being a man today is, like I said, a zero-sum game. And James Hollis talks about this in his book and a lot of his work. And what that means is that you're either a winner or a loser as a man. Most of the time, that's what you think. We catastrophize. You know, it's either one or the other. There's no middle. So there's no middle ground on the exhausting performance of somebody trying to outrun failure. That really hits home, because even as somebody that can be aware and recognize that, I can see that I'm in some way, shape, or form always looking to outrun failure. So that doesn't mean that I have failed. That just means that I can see it, which is the birthplace for shifting. We always talk about drifting and shifting. The first thing that you need to do to shift is recognize that you have gone adrift. But failure, what I want to know is by whose standards? That's the interesting thing about failure and being a man is we never really take the step of acknowledging who created the standards that have got you thinking that you are a failure or even pending failure. Have you looked beyond your mother, father, teacher, preacher, right? Have you looked at society? Have you looked at evolution? And have you looked at the barrage of social media and news? Well, we're going to take a look at that today. So let's talk a little bit about this amazing book, Under Saturn's Shadow. And let's talk about why men struggle so much. So James Hollis, James Hollis. That's the fun of the live, by the way. Why would I do a podcast recording live? So that you can see it live and also take the opportunity to interact with me and ask me some questions. So James Hollis, who's a Jungian analyst and the author of this amazing book, Under Saturn's Shadow, offers a sobering and enlightening answer to why men struggle so much. The modern man suffers from a loss of soul. Now, what do we mean when we say modern man? We're saying the man of today. I mean, just go back to the Westerns or another time of this thing called man, and you can just see how it would be very easy for me to feel like a sissy in the looking at like John Wayne or something like that, right? So what we're seeing is that men very often, when they look in the mirror, identify that they've lost their soul. So that suffering often begins in childhood. Boys are taught explicitly yet silently to disconnect from their emotional world. That vulnerability is to be shamed. Vulnerability is not something that you want to do. I'm going to be vulnerable today. And you're going to see that it's by no means a weakness. In fact, it's a superpower to be vulnerable. But there was a time that we look back and we see real men, right? I mean, I hear that all the time. I need a real man. Oh, be a man. Man up, right? That's the topic here. So vulnerability is shamed. Dependency is punished and sensitivity is exiled. I see a lot of these men's groups forming right now where they go away on a retreat of some sort and scream and yell and pound their chest and hunt and shoot crossbows and like chop wood and eat dirt and all of that stuff. And I know that there is also some space for people, to tell the truth there. And there's a lot of value in that. But, what I'm pointing out is that, a lot of it is shaming other aspects of being a man. It's the saying, look, reclaim your manhood. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. Great morning, Trisha. Trisha says, first thing I heard, vulnerability equals weakness in men. Yeah, there you go. Thank you for that. So here's a couple of things. Instead of all of that stuff, instead, we are offered this masculine mask, and it starts at childhood: to be strong, to be rational, to be in control, to be successful, don't feel, don't need, and absolutely under no circumstances, don't cry. To be a man is to inhabit a myth larger than oneself. Sit with that for a second. That's a quote by James Hollis. To be a man is to inhabit a myth that's larger than oneself. What that is that's something that's unattainable, right? So Hollis outlines 9 shadow fears that haunt the modern man. Fear of being exposed. That's a big one. Fear of emotional intimacy. Relationships, right? What is divorce at an all-time high? It's at least 50%. Fear of failure, obviously. Fear of being seen as soft. And fear of aging. This is a big one. I'm 53 years old. And for some reason, I feel that it is a sign of weakness to age. Isn't that interesting? Until I reframe it. Fear of aging and fear of becoming, most importantly, irrelevant. So these are these form the psychological Saturn. And that's what he's referring to in the book. The strict father, the cultural taskmaster. We internalize all of those versions of our identity, and we spend our lives trying not to disappoint him, right? Disappoint our father. So what we fear most has already happened to us. This is powerful. What we fear most has already happened to us. What remains is to be conscious of it. See, this is the new movement. This is the modern day version of being a human. And we're going to talk about the difference. What's the difference between being a man and a human? Fascinating, right? I think that men very often think that they're not human. They're humans. So what does it mean to be a man? So, and that's an invitation that James Hollis says, what we fear most already happened to us. What remains is to be conscious of it. And that is an invitation. And that is to just be conscious of this stuff. Remember, I told you in the beginning, what we're going to do is arm you with the awareness of this stuff. Because until we become conscious, the pain that we hide becomes the pain that we pass on. Now that right there is fascinating. If I look back at my childhood and my relationship with my father, I think he listens to this podcast. So, we just speak the truth, that's okay. There's no harm meant or anything. This is just what happens, It's funny how we are enamored by our parents and men and the father, and we look up to them. But then at some point, we always find out some sort of a weakness or a failure. Like my dad was never home. He was always traveling or something like that. And then we spend all of our time trying to blame him for that, right? Because we made him out to be this thing. And then we spend the rest of our life trying to not be like that. It's just fascinating. And all that needed to be done was an acknowledgement and a conscious acknowledgement of the truth, of the pain. I spent so much time and reading and research to learn how to figure out a different perspective and an alternative perspective of why my father the way he was, rather than him just telling me the truth about the way he was, that he didn't know how to be a dad because his dad was even worse. So we waste a lot of time. So there's a lot at stake here. So I want to talk about my own reckoning, and I'm just going to personalize this and bring this into my own space right now. So I find myself at my highest state of self-actualization right now. I'm at the highest state of consciousness and actualization right now. Most conscious version of myself to date. So this is the best me that has ever existed in that sense. While at the same time, I'm feeling as if I'm beginning the process of that hard work and self-development all over again. And that's because I was kind of on the other side of raising my two boys and realized what I did right and mostly realized what I did wrong. But then I've gone back into the lion's den and I've adopted a little girl, which is a totally different thing. And it's just waking me up to a lot of pain that I'm once again having to figure out. The only difference, because I'm more self-actualized and conscious, and this is maybe the lesson for the person that is not yet, I'm able to tell the truth about my pain and my fears and things like that, and don't feel like I'm complaining or showing a sign of weakness. I'm just looking to not pass on the pain. That's my focus right now. I don't want to pass my problems on to my kids. I want to talk about my problems, let them form their own problems, but know to talk about them. So the adoption of my daughter at a later age, I went back in, has me in a scary place. My love and admiration for my daughter are frightening, to be honest with you. They're boundless and have activated some of the old wounds of my shadow. He talks a lot about the shadow. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So they've activated some old wounds of my shadow that I'm proud to say I'm aware of. So that's different. It's different if you feel pain, but you're aware of what that pain is associated with. And it's even better if you have the ability, like I'm doing right now. I don't know who this podcast episode is for, but I'm talking about it. So things like abandonment. I struggled a lot with abandonment, meaning I was left in my eyes. I was left alone. I was, somebody said they were going to do something and failed me in my eyes and all of that stuff. So, as somebody that still struggles with those scars of abandonment, even if I talk about them, it doesn't make them easy. It just makes it easier, perhaps. I find myself justifying the idea that my daughter will never really be ready to go out into the world, surely never date a man, especially one that represents anything that I'm not happy or proud about from my childhood. But she'll never be able to go out into the world without my help and my protection. So I don't know if anybody as a parent, specifically a man, can resonate with that, but that's the way I actually think. I know it's foolish and I know that she has to live her life, but that's a wound, that's a fear. So I can normalize this by saying, "Oh, this is typical dad and daughter stuff to be so protective and joke about it," but it's no joke, right? It's actually pretty tough. And why are we talking about this during June, Men's Mental Health Month? Because this is the stuff. This is the soil. This is the fertile soil that we create these ideas and concepts that we don't let go of, and we start to struggle. And unfortunately, that ends in a very dark way sometimes. So yet at the same time that I'm feeling all these things, I see that that's my unresolved abandonment issue, those wounds, those abandonment issues that I have from my parents that I'm projecting onto her if I'm not careful. And I don't want to pass that on to her. I don't want her to feel bad going out into the world knowing that it hurts me. But there's this unhealthy version of my brain that does. I don't know who's willing to admit that kind of stuff. So as a result of some dysfunctional parenting, right? And that's on my side, and this is just my perception. That's a father who spent most of the time away from us. You know, that's manifesting today in poor relationships, with my parents. This perception that I have when I was a kid, like I stay clear. I don't get too involved in things like that. In fact, I haven't seen my mom in quite a long time. I find myself distanced from them, and I do so as a means of securing my own mental health and safety. And we have to do that sometimes. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but this is not what I want for my daughter. In fact, it's my worst fear, right? My worst nightmare for me ever could be that my kids, look at me one day the same way that I look at my parents. Isn't that interesting? So here I am having struggles with my own parents because of my wounds, but my even bigger fear, which is manifesting in unhealthy behavior if I'm not conscious of it, is that my kids will look at me that way. So then that triggers me to try to go like to the extreme and be nothing like my parents and overprotective and not trusting them and not giving them freedom and things like that. So there, I said it. Deep breath in and deep breath out. So courageously, and it takes courage, I can say that I fear her and my two boys that are going to leave me one day, like I've left my parents, right? Worse yet, not need me. That's what I'm afraid of. And if I can't acknowledge that and I internalize that, then that could turn into just a hot mess, right? And even worse than all of that would be resent me. And I have resentment for my parents. And I know how bad I feel about that. And I can't even imagine what it's like for them. But the thought of my kids resenting me like I resent my parents, oh, it's devastating. So, conscious of these things that we call wounds, I force myself to acknowledge their path as theirs. So this is what I have to do. I have to force myself to acknowledge, first and foremost, their path is their path, right? And my role is to impart whatever tools, skills, and wisdom that I can and set them free to simply be. And parents know that. We have to let them figure things out on their own and everything like that. But oof, it's tough. It's tough. And we don't understand that while we're saying we're letting our kids out on our own. And this is about not passing on the pain. We're really tarnishing them and making them feel bad. Otherwise, I will put our relationships, mine and theirs, in jeopardy. And one day, make myself the villain, right? Or make myself vulnerable to a massive depression when they actually do, in fact, leave me the way that I had to leave my parents, right? So it's got to stop somewhere. So this is just an example of how the shadow stuff can rear up without our permission. And that's important about the shadow is, you can understand what a shadow means is if the sun is shining in your face and you see a shadow. We're talking about a different type of a shadow, right? We're talking about you carrying all of these wounds behind you and thinking that they're behind you, but they're still very, very much fresh. So the idea is to bring them into your consciousness, which is painful. And that's why I've done a lot of personal growth work, but there's a lot at stake. So throughout my life, to be honest, I've done my best, right? I've attempted to do everything I thought would make me what we call a quote unquote good man, or what a good man should do. I worked, I was loyal, and I sacrificed everything that I could. I followed the script the best that I could, even when it meant silencing my own needs, ignoring the voice inside that kept whispering to me, "What about you?" Totally. To be a good man, you ignore that. You ignore that. What about you? So that's why when I was a chiropractor, women would come in and say, "I think something is going to be wrong soon." A man would come in and he can't even feel his leg. And he says, "I can't walk anymore. Can you help me?" So there's the difference. So I wore the armor, I earned the stripes, and I played the part, unfortunately, because that caused me a lot of trouble. When you're wearing armor and thick skin and you never think about yourself and you hit a wall, it's very, very tough. And that was a dark time for me. So, but underneath all of that armor, the checklist of manhood, right? Provider, protector, achiever, there was another voice that I had been ignoring. And that was ignored because of this fear that it would threaten my attempts of being deemed a real man in my wife's eyes, my children's eyes, and society's eyes, as I'm doing right now. I don't know how the society would view me doing this podcast episode, as a real man or a sissy or some sort of weak individual or maybe some sort of sensitive guy. I don't know. So that voice inside, asks, is this really living? If you allow it to, if you listen to the voice inside, say, is this really living? Is that really necessary? Do they see the toll that it's taking on me? See, the man knows the toll that all this stuff is taking on them, but you start hearing that whisper inside of you. And whether you answer that call or not is where the rubber meets the road. How long can you keep going like this? That's a voice that a lot of men hear in their minds, right? So all the while, my soul was pounding its fist. This is a cool analogy. My soul was pounding its fist against the walls of my manly ego, demanding to be heard. And it was screaming things like this. This is what is happening on the inside that we're quieting down. You're not invincible. You actually do cry. You just don't let anyone know. You long to be nurtured and cared for by yourself, right? Isn't that an interesting thing to actually admit that you want to be longed for and cared for, and what a real man thinks of, right? You sissy. For God's sake, tell them that you're only human. But I didn't know how to say that, right? Men are not taught how to say those things until they get to the very end when they seek out therapy or something, because no one ever told me that a real man could feel and voice those things. So this is one of the challenges with being a man, is nobody ever taught you what was okay. Well, they taught you what was okay, but it wasn't this. So, and still be a man, to voice your feelings and still be a man. Is that possible, to voice your feelings and still be a man? So I did what real men do. I sucked it up. I kept it inside, and I get it out in the gym or via some other unhealthy self-sabotaging things that we see happen out there. So it took me years to realize that the pain that I had buried didn't go away. And that's what happens later in life, is if we continue to bury pain, it doesn't go away. And that's when you are forced to recognize it, because you say, Houston, we have a problem. And that could show up as depression or anxiety and stuff. And you could do all you can with medication to quiet that down, but it's not strong enough to quiet that voice down, is it? So it grew roots these ideas, and it started to demand that I recognize it, and started to, shape how I saw myself. And you start to equate that into things like depression. So that was my reckoning. Unfortunately, the dark night of the soul. Now, I was confronted by some real pain that I had to deal with when I recognized that manning up had to mean something else. That's a big distinction for men to me. There's got to be another way to be a man, because the old way was killing us quietly, slowly, and proudly. So I want to talk a little bit about the arrows that men hide. This is fascinating. So along the way, I always did my best to be a man. The predominant theme was to internalize my pain, as I said before, suck it up, and refrain from complaint. And like so many men, I carried arrows. Just envision the arrows that men are carried in their back. They're buried in their back, out of sight, out of words. We don't let people know about our pain and our scars. And this is one of the problems. We all have them. The arrow of chronic pain that makes us, or greets us when we get out of bed. The arrow of financial pressure, the pending doom of losing it all as the provider. The arrow of loneliness in a crowded room. The arrow of pretending to say okay for everyone else's sake. And then finally, the arrow of knowing who you are outside of the role of the provider, the protector, or the performer, which you might not have a lot of confidence in yourself with. And if you're playing the role of someone that you are not, it's not a comfortable thing to do. But we don't talk about those things. We're taught to walk upright, smile, grind, and say, I'm good, I'm fine. What's worse is that we secretly hope that somebody notices the arrows. That's what's interesting about a man. We don't want to complain about them, but every now and then we'll turn and be like, can you see, can you see these arrows in my back? We secretly hope that somebody will notice, and we didn't complain about them or let them know, but we do want someone to notice because we know it can't go on forever. We hope someone will say, man, you're carrying a lot on your shoulders. You are strong. Falling victim to these arrows and the idea that nobody cares is a terrible thing, right? You become a victim of those arrows and say nobody cares. So there's that mommy daddy thumb sucking shadow stuff right there. So here's what I discovered. Strength isn't hiding the arrows. This is my message today. You're not strong. You're not a real man because you're hiding the arrows. You don't have courage if you can't tell somebody that you're struggling. Strength is exposing them, cleaning the wounds, and asking for help, removing what you were never meant to carry alone. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you'll perform better at all those roles, because festering beneath the surface of every concealed arrow is the real danger of unprocessed grief, rage, fear, fatigue, and they're all left untreated. And what happens when they're untreated is those arrows can begin to poison your soul. And that sometimes is irreversible. So here's the turning point. The turning point, I like to share a quote right now. So this is a quote from actually Louis Pasteur, and he used to have this, I believe, on the top of his laboratory door, and it read this: tell me not your politics or religion, only your suffering. So what it does is it cuts through the masculine myth entirely, that quote. It doesn't ask, what's your worldview? It doesn't ask the manly things. What's your worldview? What's your philosophy? What do you believe about yourself? It asks, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? And for men, there's a terrifying question, because most of us know how we're supposed to answer that. We've spent a lifetime perfecting the performance. Isn't that interesting to look at being a man as a performance? Never admitting to the ache in our backs, the grief in our bellies, or the longing in our hearts. But healing begins not in explanation. It begins with honesty, not in belief, but in revelation. That quote we could hang above our own door, right? Our own man door. And it says, tell me not who you're pretending to be. Tell me what's bleeding inside. So let's talk about a new definition of manning up. We're almost there. So I say, let's rewrite the definition of being a man. And guess what? I will throw the three magic words there at this time because I'm always open to change. And this is just how I'm feeling today. Manning up is no longer about covering the arrows. It's about naming them. It's about honoring the pain. It's okay to be brave, right? But how will they even know you're brave? That's an interesting thing to consider. It's about redefining bravery as vulnerability with integrity. That's what I like to practice, is vulnerability with integrity. I am scared of failing you. I want you to think that I'm a good father, husband, and son. I want to feel useful, strong, and necessary. That's the truth. But sometimes I also just want to rest. Sometimes I want to say, this is really hard and I'm very tired. Sometimes I wish someone would hold me and tell me I'm enough. Ooh, that's a tough one for us to say, but it's true. Even if I don't think that I've earned it that day. I want that. I want somebody to tell me that it's going to be okay. I love my wife. My wife is the perfect wife for me. That doesn't make me less of a man. It makes me more human. A good one, indeed. So integration, let's talk about this, like kind of looking at our soul over our script. We're looking to release from the script of being a man, the role of being a man. So according to Under Saturn's Shadow, that's the book, great book to read. Maturity is not about being perfect. It's about being whole. It's about integrating our rejected parts, the sadness, the softness, and the soul. It's about writing a new myth of manhood. I love the idea of creating a new myth, recognizing that it's all myth, right? We get to choose our myth, though. We're going to rewrite it. One that's rooted not in conquest, but in connection. I think that's the new version of humans, is we're all about connection right now. We didn't used to have that, but we're moving closer to that. Because maybe we don't because maybe we don't need to prove that we're men anymore. Is that a manly thing to do, to feel like you have to prove that you're a man? Maybe we just need to prove that we're here, alive, honest, and once again, human. So a final reflection. We call these dragon thoughts. Think about these questions here. What arrows have you been carrying that nobody knows about? It might be that more than depression that you're experiencing. What inherited definition of manhood are you still performing to? What would healing look like if you didn't have to do it alone? Oof, doesn't that sound good? What truth would you speak if someone simply asked you where it hurts? How would you answer that? Because most of the time we'd say nowhere, I'm fine. I have this funny shirt. My wife is wearing it today. And it says, it's just a gray shirt, and it says, I'm fine. And then on the side, it's got this picture of a big gaping wound. like somebody shot me through the side with a cannon and I'm bleeding, but my shirt says, I'm fine. Can you now look at the men in your life? This is for the women or men that want to look at other men. Can you now look at the men in your life with more empathy and understanding? Not feel bad for them, right? Because we could have a women's health month too and look at the other side. So if this episode resonated with you, I'm just going to invite you to share it with another person. And the reason why is that if you're not armed with the awareness of this stuff, you don't have a fighting chance. You don't even know what you don't know. So if you know somebody that's struggling or that you just love, share this with another man that perhaps needs permission to kind of lay down his armor. Give him permission to do that today. Let's start honoring each other's wounds, not hiding them. And remember, you're not alone. You're not broken. You're not less for feeling. Yes, you are a man. You are a man. Look in the mirror. You are a man, but you're also a human. There's the lesson for today. A soul that's worthy of healing. And it's not a weakness to be vulnerable, my friends. It's actually a superpower. Make sense? So as always, we hope that you'll follow our podcast, Make Sense with Dr. JC podcast. We have a free Substack called the Make Sense Substack, Echoes of which is blowing up right now. And just so grateful for everything that's happening right now. And I know it's on the other side of me being vulnerable and me being consistent and working hard. But it is still very, very nice to see the fruits of your hard work, which we never know when they're going to come, starting to rear up. So I'm very, very grateful for everybody that listens to this podcast, that supports us in all different ways, including friends and family. And remember, if you learn something today, give it away, because that's the only way it's going to stay. And by the way, have a nice day. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.